Hi, Laura Ann Tull here, and this is Cognition Special Edition, Palestine and Israel. Now, as an American, I was taught history of the world from the viewpoint of America, which kind of I've discovered is problematic. World War I started because of a monarch who was assassinated, and we joined the war because the Germans bombed the ships with American passengers, and that's about it. That's what we were taught about World War I. In a nutshell, if I had to narrow it down to like 2 sentences. Now, do you know we did not participate, though, in deciding how the war ended? We did not really have anything to do with the Middle East in World War I. I mean, maybe some small stuff, but it's not really taught in our history. I hear in the news when we talk about Israel and Gaza that it all started at the end of World War II when the Brits left the Middle East and Israel became a country. But that's not true. The conflict goes back longer, and we should know this history because it's important if we're involved. Now, if they keep wanting to pull us into it. So I'm going to give you a condensed history of Israel to explain why I think the wrong people are working to solve the problem, and to also point out that Israel is asking for the wrong country to help. Now, I'm an actor, but I was also a gifted and talented social studies student and also studied the history of the art of Islam from an expert in Iranian art and a Baha'i in college, Julie Badi at McDaniel College. Now, I'm also a member of Mensa, by the way. I'm realizing I see something about the Middle East that is not being talked about and needs to be discussed. And I'm going to be brutally honest, and I'm probably going to make some people mad at me, but I need to say this, and as I'm a secular Buddhist, and as a secular Buddhist, I feel like honesty is important, and that Israel and the Middle East, you need to start being honest with yourselves. 63 BC, Rome took Jerusalem. Yes, I'm going back that far. Now, before that, the history is not what I think modern Israel wants you to think, okay? There was the Kingdom of Israel that existed around 900 BC, and the Kingdom of Judea that existed around 850 BC. There used to be one big country, but it split in two over tax issues. Yeah, they had a fight over money. The Kingdom of Israel was destroyed in 720 BC by a Neo-Assyrian Empire, and the residents either went to Judea or were taken to other areas and fled. Now, this is where Israel's legend of the tribes leaving the area comes from, like the lost tribes. Judea became a state of Assyria, and then the Babylonian Empire. And this is a map. So you see, this is Israel, and this is Judea. Judea was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. It was destroyed, but the land, it wasn't like the land disappeared. It was still there, right? But this is called the Babylonian exile. And historians believe it was during the exile that the religion of Yahweh was created. The exile ended in 538 BC when the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and according to what's called the Cyrus Edict from the king of Persia, the Jews were encouraged to return to Judea, and not Israel, Judea, and the Israelis would say that they rebuilt the temple, this period called the Second Temple. At the time Rome took over, it was the Hasmonean dynasty. Judea became a Roman client state, which is the third time they became a state. Again, they were a state under the Assyrians and Babylonians, then they were exiled to Babylonia, and then they came back, and then they became a Roman state. The Romans eventually adopted Christianity, so Christians started to replace the local Jewish population toward the end of, I guess, Judea, and with this new Judea, this new Roman state called Israel, or Judea, or I don't know what it's called actually under the Roman Empire. I forgot to look that up. Be honest, I did. 7th century Arabs took over, but not the Arabs of modern time. A part of Israel history I did not know was that for a short time in the time period of the Crusades, and the Crusades were when Europe sent knights to the Holy Land to basically try to find the Holy Grail and all these legends, except that was from 11th century to the 16th, 17th century. The 13th century, the Mongols ruled the area. Yeah, I said that. The Mongols. Genghis Khan. FYI, it is this conquest that may have also started the Black Death. Yeah, that's how the Black Death ended up in Europe. It came from Asia. And I always wondered, like, how did it get from Asia to Europe? It's like it supposedly started there because Genghis Khan made it as far as Israel. FYI, is this conquest, all right? This short-lived conquest, okay? It didn't last very long. That changed Europe completely. Now, for a short-lived time after Genghis Khan, the Egyptians came in and ruled the area until the 16th century, and they were called the Mamluks and were defeated by the Ottomans, back to Arab Muslims. That's the Ottomans were, again, Muslims, Arabs, in the 16th century, and it remained in the control of the Ottomans until the 20th century, until modern day. Israel, the area as we know it now, changed hands a lot and went through a lot of owners and conflict. Meanwhile, from a European perspective, Europeans were sending people to the Holy Land to fight, and whoever was there, because whoever was there was not them. Like, I think that's kind of funny. We have this perspective that the Crusaders were going to the Middle East and fighting Arabs and fighting Muslims. Like, nope, they might have been fighting Mongols, they might have been fighting Egyptians, they were fighting whatever group controlled the area at the time, and technically they were not fighting the Ottomans, the Arabs that eventually became, like, of modern times. Now, this is Israel, and this is Judea, and Israel did not last that long. If Judea, it was in Judea that existed through the Romans. It was Judea that was the Jews, were the Jews who believe in Yahweh, who returned from Babylon. All right, this concept that early Israel is the same Israel as what Israel is today. I'm like, no. This blew my mind. Is realizing the fact that the original Israel was not monotheistic, that the original Israel was polytheistic, and it was actually the area of Judea that developed the modern religion of the Jews. And I don't know, because you think about that, and it means that Israel is now, it's like, they claim that the Bible says they owe that, or that historically they had that. They didn't have that. They didn't have that. And I'm not trying to say that Israel shouldn't exist. I'm trying to say that Israel has taken too much, and they need to stop. They need to find a way to make peace and stop the genocide and to stop being greedy and to wake up to the factual reality that they've been lying to themselves and creating propaganda and building on this situation. Now, I think to give perspective, I need to give a little history of Christianity, all right? The Roman Empire, because they're Christians in the Middle East too, who have a right to be there as well. The Roman Empire declared Christianity as a state religion in 380 AD. They did. Believe it or not, the Roman Empire became Christian. And while you might say that this was the start of the movement toward Catholic religion, as Rome is now the seat of the Vatican, I'm not going to go into that much, because that's not really what I want to talk about. But in 1054, the Catholic Church divided into East and West. Which, by the way, if you want to read a really good book that really talks about East versus West in the Catholic Church, Umberton Eco's The Name of the Rose is set during the Schism, I believe. Yeah, I love that book. It's got so much, Umberton Eco filled that book with so much hidden gems of history. With the East having Rome as their center and the West having Constantinople and what is now Turkey as its center, Constantinople was still considered the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire remained in existence but Christian until it fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 and in what is now Turkey. Okay? The Western Rome fell to Germanic tribes in 476 CE, and how it developed to become Catholic Rome is not part of this discussion. Okay? If you want to learn about that, go off and have a field day. Have fun reading about that. Though know that the West grew to be Catholic, and their religious zeal eventually led to the West sending knights and people to the Holy Land in the Middle East in the Crusades to fight whoever was there. Judea was repeatedly the center of conflict, and I call it Judea because it wasn't Israel. It was the land of the Holy Jews, the Holy Land. It was the land of the birth of Christianity. Or as they call it, again, they called it the Holy Land. As I stated already, in the 16th century, the Arabs and the Ottoman Empire took over Israel, what we know as Israel today. And in 1453, they ended the Roman Empire in Eastern Europe, taking Constantinople. So now we are up to modern age. How? Well, from the 1453 to the end of World War I, the Arabs, known as the Ottomans, controlled the area from, I want you to get a picture of this, Europe, up into Europe, Turkey, through the Middle East, and into Northern Africa. Technically, Arabs also were as far west as Spain, but that was a different group of Arabs, not the Ottomans. Muslim controlled Spain from 711 to January 2nd, 1492. So for a little bit of the beginning era of the Ottoman Empire, there was a group of Muslims in Spain, but it wasn't the Ottomans. Muhammad, created the Muslim religion in about 610 CE, modern time, not BC. Well, historically, it grew really quickly in the 7th century. It grew fast. The Islamic world is not one-dimensional, too. After Muhammad died, there was a schism that split Muslims into factions. And there were, as we know today, there are different kinds of Muslims. And that's because of this split. And I'm not going to go into that either. The 7th century is also the time period when the Arabs first took over the area we now call Israel. But they lost to the Mongols and the Egyptians, and then got back to the Ottomans. I'm stressing this because I want you to understand how convoluted and how much conflict and how much different groups had that area before the Jews came back to it in the 1940s. All right? Okay. Now, this brings us to World War I and not II. Why? Because it was World War I that really brought the Jews to be a force in the area. For 700 years, the Ottomans ruled, the Arabs ruled. When people today talk about the Muslims having 70 years history in Israel, that's what they're talking about. FYI, Lawrence of Arabia is set in World War I, with the Brits fighting fighting in Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. Now, World War I involved UK, France, Italy, Russia, Japan, the US, Greece, the Allies, versus the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottomans. And the thing is, it wasn't until recently that I realized, wait, the Ottomans were part of World War I? Why didn't I realize that? Like when I studied World War I, why wasn't that not nailed into my head? And it wasn't. It was like, even though I was taught to be a critical thinker, we had to condense so much world history in such a short period of time. It's like boom, 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 that we didn't have time to really go into World War I and go into significance. Plus, when I was in school, we weren't fighting in the Middle East yet. Like in the 80s and 90s, granted, there was, stuff with Ronald Reagan, but we didn't have these all-out wars, and the U.S. had never been attacked like at 9/11. So we didn't really look at the participation of the Arabs in World War I. And part of that is because also America wasn't really involved in the region in World War I. During World War I, the UK, and this is significant, during World War I, it was the UK that convinced the Arabs to basically rise up against their own. The reason the Ottomans fell is because the Brits convinced the Arab people that they should rise up against their own leaders. It was kind of a class war. And it was the Arab people rising against their rulers that led to the end of the empire. And here's the kicker, though, that's kind of really sad. The UK promised the Arabs their own state, and they never fulfilled their promise. So while we have an Israeli state now where the Jews have a home, technically the Arabs have been split into different countries, and they were kind of promised their own home. So from an Arab perspective, the Arabs were kind of promised their own Palestine, which would be the equivalency of their own Israel. At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was broken up into regions that later became the countries as we know them today, and German colonies were given to other countries. The area we call Israel was called Mandatory Palestine, put under the control of the UK until it was deemed the region could control itself. This mandate was created by the League of Nations, the precursor to the UN. America was never a member of the League of Nations and never participated in the mandates. But I think that it was supposedly the American president who may have actually suggested the idea of the League of Nations. America was never a member, and Mandatory Palestine existed from 1920 to 1948. Now, the UK had promised, again, the Arabs a state of their own, but fell through. And in 1917, there was the Balfour Declaration, Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter to Lord Rothschild. Keep in mind, this is 1917, during World War I. Lord Rothschild was a leader in the UK Jewish community, declaring the UK's support for a creation of a home for the Jewish people. So Mandatory Palestine was supposed to create an area where everyone in that area kind of cohabitated and they governed themselves. The Brits had their own agenda. Now, it's incorrect to say that the League or the mandate by the League promised a Jewish state. It didn't. The intent of the League, and there's actual documentation out there. There's articles online that state the mandate was supposed to be the creation of a Jewish state. No. The intent of the League was to make Palestine a state where different groups of people lived together, speaking 3 official languages: English, Arabic, and Hebrew. And it's the same. It's the same intent for the UN now. Okay, the UN, the head of the UN just recently released a mandate. He basically had to, and this is what he did. This mandate. He basically had to declare, in essence, that Israel was committing war crimes, and he's never had to do this in ever. From 1920 to 1948, Jewish immigrants started to move to Palestine. Okay, during the time between the end of World War I and the end of World War I to World War II. When World War II started, both sides supposedly had operators in the Middle East, even though the Middle East is not considered a participant in World War II. There was conflict there. And here's the thing, though. The UK led battles in the Middle East against Arabs and also against groups that were sympathetic to Hitler, supposedly. Hitler used the fact that the Arabs wanted their own state to declare that they were allies, maybe. And I said, stress maybe, because this is all propaganda. During this time, the Jews created a militia that eventually became the Israeli Defense Force. That's true, okay? During the time after World War I through to the end of World War II, the Israelis were actually building their own, solidifying their own community, creating their own militias, okay? So there was a war in the Middle East during World War II, and it led to division between the Arabs and Jews that created the capacity for the UK to end Palestine and declare the new state of Israel at the end of World War II. You know what I'm trying to say? That we don't study the history of the fact that during World War II, there was conflict in the Middle East between Brits and Arabs and Jews. I shouldn't call them Israelis because Israel didn't exist at the time, during Jews. And yet we don't consider that part of World War II. And we don't look at that as either as really it's a separate war almost. Now I want to stress it's not the mandate at the end of World War I, but the actions of the UK during World War I and post World War I into World War II that led to the Palestinian become Israel. Because of course it did not help that Germany pushed the Arabs to rise up against the mandate and against UK if they did. If they did. See, and that's a big if. Because there has been at least one study that says the Germans actually assisted in helping Jews reach Israel and that they were indifferent to the Arab world and its actions. In the 1930s, the Reichs encouraged Jews leaving Germany for the region of Israel. They actually encouraged, which they called Palestine. They actually encouraged people to go to Palestine. There's an article online that I found with the Museum of Tolerance here in Los Angeles called Palestine and the Nazi Germany by Sarah Ruger. According to the article, Hitler was not involved with the conflict so much in the Middle East in the 30s, at least during the time Britain controlled the region. They didn't want to piss off Britain. And if you really dig into it, Hitler saw the Arabs as inferior. So though on some level they praised Islam, they also persecuted Muslims. And if you dig around online too, you can find all this stuff about how many of the Muslim states and Muslim countries and Muslim groups after World War I actually renounced fascism. Like there were individuals who embraced Germany, like the Mufu of Israel, but on a larger scale, most Arabs did not like Hitler, did not like Nazism. They saw it as like a bad thing, as evil. With the exception of Mufi of Jerusalem, who was exiled at one point, and I'm not going to talk about the history, this is too much to talk about. There appears to be more factual history that the Arab world denounced Hitler and his fascism, and a lot of the Arabs were... the fact that a lot of the Arabs were supposedly pro-Hitler was potentially propaganda to start conflict between the Jews and the Muslims. It may have been a tool for the Brits and I hate to say this, it may have actually been a tool for the Brits because the region was a source of resources and also trade with the Far East and India. One of the reasons that Britons fought against the Turks and the Ottomans during World War I, because, again, the Ottomans were like far away from, well, not part of the Europe conflict and the assassination of some king, which started the whole thing with the Germans, okay, was because they had colonies that they needed to trade with and connect with, and the Arabs were an obstacle for their trade and their connections to their colonies. However, okay, I know that you may realize that I'm basically blaming the Brits for what happened in Israel. Yeah, I am, because it's not the U.S. that put us in this position. It's not Britain was in charge of mandatory Palestine. Britain was supposed to help the Jews and the Muslims get together and have a powwow. I want to stress right now that there have been a lot of stuff coming out of the UK that has been in support of this ceasefire, in support of Palestinian and Israel's creating a two-party system, in support of the UN potentially getting involved. That there have been videos and commentary out of the UK that I have seen discussing discussing the fact that this conflict should not be happening the way that's happening. I have not, however, seen anything out of the UK talking about how the Britons had mandatory Palestine, they were in charge of the area, and they had the power at one point to fix this situation. I want to talk about Israel and their religion, all right, again, because I know there are historians who disagree, but the facts appear to be that ancient Israel was polytheistic and did not believe in one God, and it was not until the Neo-Babylonian period that the Jews solidified their religion of Yahweh. I'm not trying to argue Israel should not exist, but I don't think they need to be honest about their true history and about how much they are really owed. They're not owed as much as they claim, and they need to accept that Palestinians have a history in the area, too, and deserve a home there. The original Israel was not as big as the Israel is today. And they have been trying to push this biblical perspective, this biblical Israeli utopia that was apparently huge, that probably didn't exist. Palestinian was the name of the area, now known as Israel, and it was called, and that's what the Greeks called it. Like the Greeks, there were these Philistines that moved into the area from, I think, maybe part of Greece. I didn't want to dig into this because otherwise this video would last for hours. But Palestine is not an Arabic name. It's a Greek name. And it dates back to the 12th century BC. And it makes kind of sense that the League of Nations would call it Palestine because it probably was intended to alleviate the conflict by not choosing an Arabic or an Israeli name at the end of World War I. I mean, we all think that, Palestine must be this Arabic name and must be the name of the locals. It is a name that dates back to Greek times when the Greeks called the area Palestinian. And at one point, it's also considered like the name of Israel and Judea. That area was called Palestine. Okay. And a mandatory Palestine was supposed to remain in effect until the region could govern itself. In 1947, the UN passed a resolution to divide the region into two areas, one Arab and one Jewish. Instead, there was a Palestinian war that divided the area in 1948 into the State of Israel, the Kingdom of Jordan that annexed part of the West Bank and Egypt established the all-Palestinian Protectorate of Gaza. Over time and more conflict, Israel ended up creating the situation that exists today with the West Bank and Gaza under the well-care, if you call it that, of them. So I say Israel because I think they could have made other choices. There was a war, there was conflict, and they basically took over West Bank and Gaza, and they have created, in essence, this sort of situation where they're the keepers of the Palestinians. And it's almost like they've got two concentration camps within their country. Now, and this is another thing that is talked about, but we in the U.S. don't talk about it as much as part of the history. Part of the Palestinian War that happened in 1948, 47, 48, is called the Nakba. half the pre-war Arab population, 700,000 people, were expelled in the creation of Israel. Not this two-state solution that the UN and the League of Nations intended. The UN intended, with mandatory Palestine, a two-state solution. They did not intend for Israel to take over the area and then subjugate the Palestinians to be sub-citizens within Israel. If Israel wants a two-state solution, why are they asking the U.S. for help when they should be talking to the UN? It was the UN that wanted the two-state solution. It was the UN that was initially created to basically solve the problems of World War I and World War II, to mandate the peaceful solutions. And by a two-state solution, that could entail two different things. First, two different countries, Palestine and Israel, or one country with two or more states. The only problem with the second is that Israel would have to relinquish power and a new country would need to be formed where Israel is one state and Palestine or Gaza and the West Bank are two states. They could create a new parliament with officials from the different states and a prime minister and all citizens, or Israeli or Palestinian, having equal voices. One nation, either called Palestine, which is Greek and not Arabic, or another name, maybe even the original Judea. Israel has to stop lying to itself and the world about what they are really owed as a country of Israel and really look honestly at their actions toward Palestinians. They also need to be honest about their own history. They were a polytheistic religion, a polytheistic country, until the Babylonians took over. And then, when they came back for the second temple and created Judea, then they became the religion of Israel as we know it today, or the Jewish religion as we know it today. So technically, the home of the Jewish faith is Judea and not Israel, which means Israel should be the area in the southern part of Israel, Judea, what Judea was, and maybe if they really wanted to create a two-state system, Gaza and the West Bank, the people from those areas should be allowed to move to the northern area of Israel, and then Israel has the southern area. That's what I've been trying to figure out, because West Bank needs a way access to the ocean. And Gaza and West Bank, if they really want to be, the people of both areas should be put together in the same part of Israel in order to create these two states. And I feel like Israel needs PTSD counseling to learn to find a way to get along and to stop all the racism. Yeah, Israel, you have been just as guilty of bigotry and racism as the Palestinians have been. And I'm not even going to talk about the Hamas, okay? I'm not bringing them up because we all, I think, around the world agree they're a terrorist group. They are running Palestinians into the ground, and they are just as responsible for destroying their own, in effect, because they're being run by corrupt people who are using the Palestinians for financial gain. That's what I believe is going to end up being found out about the Hamas. Again, Israel needs to really look at the facts of their own country and stop looking at the Bible as if it is completely valid as factual. Please, Israeli leaders, if you really want a solution, talk to the UN and not the U.S. I know, Biden, I know you may not like hearing this. I voted for you. But because you either Israel wants peace or you want more guns and weapons from us for genocide. Because the only reason Israel's turning to us is for our weapons and our money, not for a peaceful solution. And I know there are people going to think that this is crazy. There are people who want to think about the Bible's real. And I know that for a fact. And I'm a SAG actor. I'm so disgusted with the show, The Chosen, and with the fact that there's a bunch of people in my union who are supporting that show that is shoving the gospel down people's throats. It's not real, people. It's just as real as, it's just as factual as the Iliad. And granted, the Iliad is based on some factual context. There are things in the Iliad that are true. But really, there was not a monster with an eye in the middle of its head. So please, okay? Please. Go to the UN. Go to the UN and start talking about a solution that actually brings long-term remedies to the area. Because the world can't take any more of this violence. And the world can't take any more of this racism. And believe it or not, the actions of Israel are a domino effect around the world. Racism, bigotry, hatred. You're feeding the seeds of those things. And you're supposed to be a country that has morality, has values, has a religion that's supposed to be the best in the world. Then why are you hating so much? And why are you killing so much? Please, please, do the right thing. Thank you.